Okay, so let's start with that. We do the welcome to country because, you know, in Australia, us whiteys have only been here a couple of 100 years, and you know, we just basically stole the land, and here we are enjoying the results of it. And so one of the very small things that we can do is acknowledge that there have been Indigenous people on the land for over 40,000 years, giving teachings very similar to the Buddhist teachings, and doing rituals, looking after the land. So as an acknowledgement of this, and to keep the harmony, we acknowledge and pay respect to the Jagera and Turrbal people, who are the traditional custodians of this land on which Langri Tangpa Centre resides. And we pay our respects to all the elders in the past, going back 40,000 years, in the present and emerging, and especially welcome with gratitude and respect any Australian Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander students to our centre and to these teachings today. So thank you. And then we have our Mandala offering. So Venerable Robina, I'm not sure if you can see, but we have a Mandala offering. It looks like a crown, this
Hang
one.
on. Before you go, I've just lost all of you. I can't see you all. Hang on, something's happening.
Oh, okay.
Hang on a tick.
Can you see now?
No, I've lost the whole page. I've just got to find the picture again. Find the Zoom again. Hang on a minute. Just a
The
tick.
gallery.
Hang on a second. No, I can't find anything. I can't see anybody. I've got to put myself back in.
How about that? Can you see now?
No, nothing's come. Wait a minute. No, what I'm meaning is my whole page has gone. So I have to. I'm trying to find it. Download now. No, it won't come. This happens to me regularly, and I never know why it happens.
I think if you can you find your photo?
No, what I'm trying to say is nothing is there. What I'm saying is all I've got is audio. The picture, it's like the actual page has gone, but I'm still there because I can hear each other. I'm just trying
okay.
I never know how to do it, so I just have to see if I can just press the link again, and something should happen. It says allow. I come there, click allow off the dialog box by your browser. You don't see it, so then it says launch meeting. I'm not trying to launch a meeting, that's ridiculous. So
no, because you're already here.
I know that, exactly.
And you're already spotlighted.
Exactly, I know, but I can't see anybody. The page has gone.
Oh dear.
Hide others, hide Zoom. Now wait a minute, now I found it. I knew what to press. Now I've got it. I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, good, this is
so
wonderful.
Now we have
good, go on.
Our beautiful Mandala offering, and so for those of you who know the tune, then we can do the tune. For those of you who don't, then there is the English there for you.
And what we're doing is offering them the universe, okay? I mean, you didn't probably learn at school that the centre of our universe is Mount Meru, or even more exciting, that our sky is blue because it reflects off lapis lazuli. But according to Buddhism cosmology, that's the idea. Now, if you don't know the contents of the universe from that perspective, we can just imagine the thing that Miffy is holding, and we visualize the picture. Pile up in your mind all the most marvelous things of the world that make people happy, and you pile them up and you make them as an offering to the Buddha as a request for the teaching. It's got really wonderful meaning. Very nice. So I will now lead the next prayer. I'll lead the next little prayer. 2 parts to it. The first 2 lines. Yeah, we're going to do the next prayer. Refuge and bodhicitta.
But I don't have any of the screen share for it. I just had the screen share for the
Oh,
mandala.
okay, never mind. So just think, people. Just imagine. Maybe we'll have it for next class. Just think. This little prayer, the first two lines, we're just expressing, we're saying that until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That's for those of us who are already Buddhists. We're thinking this way. And the second two lines are stating our purpose of being together. The Tibetans would say stating our motivation. So we're making it a very altruistic motivation. We're thinking that all the positive karma, the positive imprints in our mind that we put into our mind, because every thought counts, every thought leaves a seed in the mind. So all these delicious seeds we're going to plant in our mind from listening to these teachings, we think may they all ripen in the future as our Buddhahood, because then we're capable of helping others. We're thinking like that. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupashok. That's twice. The first one was English. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupashok. Okay, good, wonderful. So we work on our mind, we can handle anything. Well, it's a fact. This is what's amazing. I mean, it's almost so simple, it's almost embarrassing. But this really is the essence of the whole Buddhist approach to life. We often don't think it's that. We make it all very holy and mystical. We call it being mindful, and we think of some kind of weird thing will happen in the mind, and all the thoughts go away, and somehow we just kind of we're very complicated. How we make it very complicated. And I think the reason is because we don't really understand the Buddhist view of what the mind is. There's something so fundamental. I mean, we use the word mind. Yeah, I know what the mind is. We say the word attachment. Yeah, I know that. Anger. Yeah, I know that. Anxiety. Yeah. But we've got a very different interpretation. It's like another language. So we have the modern view, which is from the materialist, the philosophical materialist view of the universe, which we know, of course, these days is the view that prevails in the universe. We know that. And that's what we're very, very familiar with. And the whole approach we have in our world, of course, isn't it, that we're made by our mummy and daddy, and that naturally whatever they do to us makes us who we are, and then the Catholic nuns who taught us, and then the people who did this, and the boyfriend who was mean to us, and the kid next door who beat us up when we were 7, and the dog who beat us when we were 9. And so we imagine that all these kind of things happened to us, and they triggered, and then they sort of started a certain process. So so when you're 74 or 97 or 14 and you're 26, or you go to your therapist because you really can't handle your life, things are troubling, your depression is arising, your anger's there, you don't know why, we don't know what's going on, we often don't know what's going on until it vomits out our mouth half the time, until we can't get out of bed one morning because we're so depressed. And we think, well, what do? We go to therapists. This is our system, isn't it? And nothing wrong. It's a marvelous system. Many people are helped, and we have a deep understanding of the mind from the point of view of the brain. We have this very clear explanations of things. But it's not the only explanation. Buddha's not arguing with many of the explanations we have. He simply says there's a major component that we're missing, So the very typical thing we feel is we're made by mummy and daddy. We began in our mother's womb. So, of course, if you're Christian, you know that God put the soul there. Or if you're a Muslim, similar thing. But the view that's so prevalent, isn't it, is this view that mummy and daddy made us. And I'm not even being sarcastic by arguing with it, which seems almost a shock. What do you mean, they didn't make us? Well, no, they didn't. They gave you a body. They're very kind, They didn't give you what the Buddha would refer to as your mind. And this is the thing that even just listening to this, it's a very powerful concept. And if we try to listen to Buddha's logic of it, it really radically changes everything. And I'm not trying to force you to be Buddhist, but it's just a fascinating explanation, And that's what's interesting these days, with His Holiness especially, Dalai Lama. He's this incredible person who's bringing so much harmony between seemingly completely opposite views on this planet, from the religious point of view with certainty, but also the scientific. It's so fascinating, I mean, I think in the West these days, it's blowing people's minds that there's been this extraordinary system about the mind, not just the mind, but the universe itself, about philosophy, that's been existing well and truly before we clever Europeans came along. I mean, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, and I always quote it was these amazing Indians, and Buddha comes out of India, as we know, these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago, who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. I mean, we probably thought it was Mr. Freud 100 years ago, and I really mean that sincerely. So it's a bit sort of, you mean 3,000 years ago they've been discussing these things? Well, yes. But what do we know, Because if we're white people or we're European-based, we track our knowledge back to the Greeks, don't we? And nothing wrong with the Greeks. But what do we do? What do we know about China? What do we know about India? I mean, what do we know about the Australian Aboriginals? Zero, precisely. You understand? We're very kind of narrow-minded in our arrogant view of the universe. And we have this very kind of a superior view. We've now discovered the reality of the brain. And I mean, like as if we're the most clever people on the planet. But this, it's only now with so much more being published in English, and that more and more the Dalai Lama, since the last 40 years, more and more of these conferences, there's a particular organization in America, I think, that's the main one behind this, but not the only ones. It's called Mind and Life. You'll see their website, mindandlife.org. They've been behind these amazing conferences the last 30, 40 years of His Holiness and the best brains in the Tibetan Buddhist world, who've studied all this stuff extensively, and that's what's happened in the Tibetan monastic university system. They study extensively the views that have carried on from these amazing Indians. Buddha just didn't chuck them all out. He carried on so much of what had been found already to be true, of the views of karma, this extraordinarily sophisticated view of the mind. These Indians before the Buddha, he was educated in this system. They mapped the mind, basically. They mapped the mind. And how? Not the brain. They mapped the mind internally. I mean, this is mind-boggling. We don't have a similar system. We don't have a view that, in fact, in our world, psychology, I think, is the lowest on the totem pole because it's not a hard science. Neuroscience, we love. We can see it and touch it and taste it and smell it. The hard sciences we admire, but psychology is kind of considered rather weak and wishy-washy because we think we can't prove the cognitive process that isn't describing the brain, But this is the exact point that Buddha makes, which is so radically different. And this is coming from these Indians before the Buddha. He went as far as he could go in that amazing system. And in particular, the central technique these Indians invented, which is the key to success, the key to the success of their ability to see the mind so precisely and so skillfully, which is also the key to success as a Buddhist. Buddha took this technique. It's called single point of concentration. It's a brilliant skill that enables a person to go beyond the grosser levels, the conceptuality and the sensory. And let's face it, we don't posit anything other than that in neuroscience. This is what's radically different. But this brilliant skill that these Indians invented that enables you to go to these more subtle levels of your own cognitive process itself, your own subjective mind itself. This is not we just don't think like that in our culture. So we need to understand this if we really want to understand what Buddha's saying. And we're going to get to the hands-on approach we can use in daily life. But we look into the background, it's very fascinating. And that's what all the modern scientists are now discovering, And then lots of these, so even, for example, the Dalai Lama talking to all these, okay, before I finish, these Indians before the Buddha, this skill, it's known vaguely, the world now calls it mindfulness, and there's 47 varieties of mindfulness, but it's basic, and it's not called that in Buddhism, we just called it that. But it's this brilliant skill, this psychological skill that's incredibly, when you're able to completely subdue the grosser levels of your mind, to go to these more subtle levels. And why would you want to do that? Not just to bliss out. You would indeed be blissed out. Lama Yeshe talks about this beautifully in his recent book called Mahamudra, How to Discover Our True Nature. And he describes some of the qualities that you would accomplish, having accomplished what they call single-pointed concentration. This state of samadhi, of concentration. And this from these Indians. It sounds like science fiction. As Lama says, it is unimaginable, almost unbelievable. But this is their view of what the mind is and what its capability is. So when you've accessed these more subtle levels, you've completely subdued the grosser level, and you have this brilliant mind that is so vast, so clear, so precise, as if you can see every atom in the universe. I mean, you can't even describe the qualities because there's no equivalent for us in modern science, so therefore we just have to mystify it, and that's why we think it's all religion. It's all in the sky, No, this is real, doable stuff. So this skill to steady the mind down, most of us won't get that single-pointed concentration. To get that, you've got to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, give up your husband, your mortgages, your pussycat, and all the rest, and you've got to go to the mountains, and you'll work for several years, and you will get this single-pointed concentration. And many people, meaning us, regular people, white people, many people like you and me, our friends, are up in the mountains, metaphorically or actually, accomplishing this right now. Over the centuries, millions of people have accomplished it. And why would you want to do this? Because this subtle level of mind is capable, super capable, of unpacking and unraveling the contents of our mind, which is the job we're trying to do as a Buddhist, as Lama Yeshe beautifully puts it, trying to become our own therapist. Because the Buddha's approach is that we have the capability of seeing our mind at ever more subtle levels internally and listening to all these crazy conceptual stories that our mind is completely full of. You know, that, for example, you know, we know very well, we wake up in the morning until the day we go to sleep, we just know. We're there, we are doing breakfast, washing the dishes, driving the car, having very coherent conversations with people, but we know behind there's this unceasing, isn't there, stream of thoughts, real thoughts, actual thoughts, but they're unedited, they're chaotic, and we assume this is completely normal. And even in our modern views of the mind, we consider it completely normal, meaning we don't have techniques to be able to handle, to harness, to unpack and unravel and organize. But that's exactly what we're capable of doing. That's the brilliant skill. And these Indians before the Buddha accomplished this. Buddha didn't sort of chuck it out. He took this with him when he diverged in his own direction. And of course, he diverged in his own direction. He went as far as he could go in accomplishing what they say we could accomplish in terms of sorting your mind out, getting rid of suffering and its causes. He went as far as he could go, but he said, no, there's still more work to do. So he diverged in his own direction, and now we have what's called Buddhism. So many of the views that they have found to be so, Buddha does not disagree with. He just went further, in particular in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self. That's what the Buddha did. That's how come we have Buddhism now. But the background of it, the history of it before that is really just amazing, and it's only now that all the thinkers in the modern world are starting to really respect and appreciate. And it's because of the amazing work of the Dalai Lama, you know. There's so much going on now, so much real, genuine looking into what is consciousness. I mean, there's a book I read recently, well, actually when I was editing Lama Zopa's book about death, how to help at the time of death. And one book I read was by an American medical journalist called The Undead. It's not about zombies, but he's this wonderful, funny fellow called Nick Teresi, and he's a medical journalist, and his main expertise is death. So people always think he should be depressed, but he's not depressed. He's a wonderful, funny fellow, you know. But he wrote this book, and it's actually he was quite cynical and critical of the whole industry of taking organs. He appreciates people's amazing job of giving their organs when they die, but he's really quite cynical about the arrogance of these elitist doctors and the system and how manipulative it is, all sorts of things. But nevertheless, the real point I'm talking about here is he said there's real problems now in the West. There's no real agreement any longer in the medical profession in all the different states in America. He didn't discuss other countries about exactly when is death. And this is very interesting from the Buddhist point of view, of course, because as we all know, or we might not, but we're going to mention it, that as far as the Buddha is concerned, our consciousness, our mind, and these words are used synonymously, they didn't start in our mother's womb. They didn't come from a superior being. They didn't come from our mummy and daddy. They're not a function of the brain. They came from before. Our own mind is our own. This is a crucial point in Buddhism. You don't have to believe it, but this is the Buddha's view, and it's his own experience. It's not just made up. It's not revelation. He's found this to be true, that our consciousness is this continuity of thoughts that go back and back and back, and then continue. So it was interesting. He said now one of the problems, for example, about the mind, I'm going to get to the daily stuff, don't worry. There's an advantage in talking fast, and if you speak Australian, then you'll be okay with me. But apparently I'm even too fast for the Australians sometimes. When I lived in America for so long one time and I saw an Australian movie in Hollywood, I needed the subtitles. They had subtitles for the Americans. I needed them because I was so not used to the Australian accent. It was so funny. Anyway, whatever. So the thing was, because, for example, we know all over the world there have been so many experiences in every culture of people who, quote unquote, come back to life. Apparently in the Victorian times, you even put a bell in your coffin in case you woke up under the earth and you could ring the bell politely. I'm still alive, mate. Because, this is not an uncommon thing, but this is a really big problem if you're trying to cut people's organs out and they inconveniently come back to life. And of course, it can't be explained in the medical profession. They put it in the too hard basket, But what I'm saying is it's one of the many things that comes up that now is causing the modern scientists forcing them to reassess their assumptions about when death is. He had a whole chapter, for example, of people who have what the world calls out-of-body experiences. You know, they're totally anaesthetized on the operating table, and many reports of person floating above their body, seeing exactly what's going on. And of course, the medical profession are quite cynical. No, not possible, can't be possible. But one woman he quoted, and he was very funny about it, who had to have such a radical procedure that they had to practically make her dead in order to do this procedure, and she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. So of course they can't explain it, you know. So Buddhism's got a very clear explanation. That's your subtle consciousness. I mean, it's detailed in great depth in the death process. You've got your gross consciousness, and when you stop breathing, when you think that they think you're dead, ready for the body bag, no, you ain't dead yet, baby. You've got your subtle mind, and even a very subtle level, and it's described in incredible detail, especially in the Vajrayana teachings. It's really fascinating. And this is what's being studied now. You know, these yogis can stay in their mind for many days after they stop breathing and meditating. And so the Dalai Lama and all his mates in the scientific world, he said they've created a machine, and he cracked jokes about it. They've only got one machine to wire up the yogis who are meditating, who the West thinks are dead, trying to locate consciousness, you know, the presence of consciousness. He said, but the trouble is, if the yogi dies in Dharamsala and the machine is down in South India, by the time they get the machine up to Dharamsala, the yogi's left his body. So we need more machines, he said. So they're looking at these things now. But in this book, one doctor was quoted as saying, I can say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that. Now that's pretty powerful, and it's marvelous that now they're checking their assumptions of what the mind is, what consciousness is, you know. There's all these discussions, which is fantastic. It's so important. So anyway, this is coming from India. It's been established for thousands of years in India that with consciousness can go to very subtle levels. It doesn't need the brain to be at that level. If you saw a person who had accomplished single-pointed concentration, they would look like they were dead, basically. So it's a very interesting discussion. So this is fundamental in the entire Buddhist view. So of course, to be a Buddhist or to take Buddhist techniques, you don't have to believe any of this. Buddhists don't ask you to believe a single word. You can be a 1% Buddhist, not a problem. Lots of people do mindfulness and couldn't care less about Buddhism. Nothing wrong. I'm just giving you the big picture, that's all, the background bit, you know. So anyway, the mind is not physical for the Buddha. Just tell you these points. It's not the handiwork of a creator or mummy or daddy, which is a big shock because there are two options, isn't it? In both cases, they both assert, I began in my mother's womb. No, sorry mate, you didn't. Buddha looks into the past. Well, so do the materialists. But, you know, we look into the physical past. We go back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and the monkeys, don't we? No, that's your body, no probs. But your mind, baby, you track it back to its own self. So the fundamental point about the mind is it's not the body. It's not even a function of the body. It is not a function of the brain, as that scientist has found out. But it doesn't mean the brain doesn't play a role. And they're not being insulting to neuroscientists, please. But you could argue that what goes on in the brain is a physical indicator of what is going on in the mind. This is the point, you know, at the gross level, not the subtle. So, with this background, then that's what Buddhists say what mind is. This not continuity of mental moments, this subjective cognitive process. You know, and his job is to cognize. That's his job. The job of mind is to cognize. So now, Buddha's deal is that in this mind of ours, so before we start there, first of all, mind, when you study the text, you know, on the mind, and they study it in great depth in the monasteries, and I'm sure they studied it at Langri Tangpa Centre as well, there's a text called Lorig, Mind and Awareness. And it's a description, first of all, this is really crucial, by the way. This is a really interesting point, this is quite a telling point. The Buddha would describe we've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. So I always use a simple example, which you'll see is quite an interesting point, telling us about the Buddhist approach to the mind and what we can do with it. So, you know, if I say to you, you see me here looking, and in my hand you'll see this thing. It's a black thermos, okay? It's a thermos. So I chose this online because I like the design. It's got a very nice lid. For me, it's a very modern design. I like it. So I will say to you, oh, what a well-designed thermos. So what we naturally assume, isn't it, is that my eyes are seeing a well-designed thermos that's black. Well, no, your eye consciousness is not capable. The Buddha's view is that the 5 sensory consciousnesses, eye consciousness, and by the way, the word consciousness is synonymous with the word mind, virtually. Your mind is not physical. Consciousness, your eye consciousness, combined, working in dependence upon an eyeball and all the nerves working nicely, will have a cognition of only two things. Sensory consciousnesses are like dumb animals. And this is a very, very major point in order to understand why we have our experiences, our emotions and things. This is a really powerful point, that the senses are really limited in their capacity for cognition. Eye consciousness can only cognize two things, shape and color, and that is it. Sound, ear consciousness can only cognize mere sound. So then you've got to ask yourself the question immediately, and this is the point. If my eye consciousness can only cognize shape and color, what part of my consciousness is cognizing a well-designed black thermos? This is the important point. This is the crucial point. So guess what, folks? It's your mental consciousness. Now, as Lama Zopa says, that's where the workshop is. That's where the thoughts, and the Tibetans point here for that. It's very interesting. That's your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your unconscious, your subconscious, instinct, intuition, the chaos in here that we feel is naturally berserk, naturally confusing, that no one understands it, and it pops up out of nowhere. We have unconscious, we have dreams of these weird experiences in our dreams, and we just assume no one can understand it and no one can control it. But the Buddha says, sorry, I found some techniques, honey. And remember, 3,000 years ago, before him, these dudes had found techniques, how to unpack and unravel the mental consciousness. So, okay, if the eye consciousness is seeing shape and color, and this is the point, as Lama Yeshe puts it, we make the body the boss. We are so attached to our body, so obsessed with our physical experiences. And of course, the senses are huge. They're our doorway to the universe, let's face it. But we give them way much more power than they in fact have, Buddha says, And this is causing us immense problems. I mean, we define our happiness and suffering in terms of whether we feel good with nice sensory experiences. It's so limited. And also the Buddha would say it's completely inappropriate. It's not even accurate. So we've got mental consciousness. So this is what happens. My eyes go to this shape and color here, and I'm not joking now, but in a millisecond, quicker than Google, and this is really true, quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed. The workshop. What's that? Where all my thoughts and feelings and emotions are stored. Now, the interesting point in Buddhism, this is fascinating. Geshe Tashi, one of our lamas who was in London, he says every millisecond of every person, animal, monkey, dog, human, you name it, everything we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, nothing goes astray. Everything is like we're shooting a movie all day, and everything is stored as like memories in our mind. This is why people can have clairvoyance. This is why we can see past lives and future lives. When you've got single point of concentration and you've gone beyond the gross level, then you can see the past and the future. You can see the minds of others. This is nothing special. This has been around for several thousand years. Not in our culture, obviously. So, everything is stored in the mind. So, to the degree that I can remember anything, as soon as my eyes see this shape and color, up comes this story stored in my mental consciousness. Oh, what a well-designed thermos. I have the memory it's a thermos. I know it's black because I've decided that I like certain shapes and colors, and I'll decide that that's a nicely designed thermos. And it all happens so quickly, it's like in an instant. We think our eyes see it. No, they don't. Your mind, your mental consciousness makes it up. Now that's where the workshop is, and this is what we're going to understand. This is what we're going to look at, and this is what we need to do. This is what practice is. The eyes see what they see, but we make up so many stories that we think they see, and this is really obvious, So, what is this mental consciousness of ours? Well, there's a grosser level and there's a more subtle level, and we don't touch that subtler level of cognition until we have this single point of concentration business, so forget that. So we live at the level of a fairly gross level, and it's actually all conceptual. This is very, very surprising. We would say we have concepts, and we point up here, and then we point to our heart, and we say we have emotions, and we think they're completely separate. Well, what's fascinating, and this is hard initially to see, the Buddhist model of the mind, which is so distinct, so precise, so taught in such detail, that it's all the things that go on in our mental consciousness day to day. Definitely there are strong emotions, but those emotions such as anger or love, for example, the physical component is just the tip of the iceberg. But this is our tragedy. We only know we have emotions when our body is shaking, or when you're lying in bed inert and you can't move because you're profoundly depressed. So we only notice what's going on in our mind when the body shows something. This is our biggest mistake. In other words, we leave it until way too late to notice what's going on in the mind. We wait until the body has an experience, and then we figure, so for example, in my habit was to vomit out my mouth whatever I felt. So, and I didn't think about it. It was just my sister did something mean and anger pops out. And I didn't know I was angry until the words are vomiting out my mouth. Oh, I must be angry. And you didn't know you were depressed until you couldn't move. So what are we missing? Because this is our main tragedy in our culture. We wait until it's too late to notice we've got a problem. And that's when we sneak off guiltily to the therapist. If you just get a little bit annoyed during the day because you drop a cup while you did the dishes, you don't go to your therapist, I dropped a cup today, I got annoyed. She'll laugh at you, just kick you back home, and don't come back until you want to kill yourself. So we assume that problems have to be serious before we do something about it. This is the most bizarre point for the Buddhist view. This is a very, very fascinating point, actually. The Buddha's saying that all these emotions we have, like, say, anger or jealousy and anxiety, you're doing the dishes that morning and the thoughts are all rumbling along. You're not dealing with them, though, are you? Because you're not paying attention, because it's not serious yet. But they're just there, chatting away all the time. The anxious thoughts, the worried thoughts, he this, she that, maybe this, and then you get distracted in something else. But when they when they rise to the surface and you're screaming, then you can't ignore them. But then we think, what'll I do? Like in classes, one of the commonest things is, if I'm in the middle of a fight with my boyfriend, what can I do? That's literally like asking that you're going 120 k's an hour on the freeway and you suddenly notice your wheels are falling off because you've never paid attention before, because in fact you didn't even know there was such a thing as mechanics. You never heard of car mechanics. You've never paid attention to the wheels when they started to wobble. This is a really simple but profound example. We live our lives like this. You've never heard of that there are methods to maintain your car. In fact, we know this so well now. Nobody would go more than a month or two without putting the new oil in, or whatever they do these days with electric cars. But you make sure your wheels are okay every day. You'd never dare. You know about maintenance. But we do not, and this is not a joke, we do not have maintenance for our minds. We only have curative, and then we have to take a pill because we don't know anything else. And keep the medical companies going with all their propaganda. Now they've discovered the secret to success because they know what depression is. So the Buddha's point, and I'm not joking, that heading is exactly correct. When we start to become familiar with our thoughts and learn to train ourselves to be in charge of them, it's a difficult job, but we are capable, then we will be able to handle, because it's like maintenance. Buddha's approach is maintenance. Minimum. Of course, then it's not just maintenance. We can turn ourselves into the best Ferrari on the planet. We can mold our mind in any shape we like, Lama Zopa says. We can turn it into the mind of a Buddha. This is eventually the long-term goal. But even if you just want to apply Buddha's techniques in daily life, you'd have these brilliant preventative methods, and indeed curative. And it's not mystical. We're not discussing changing your brain. They did that back in the 30s. It was a lobotomy. It didn't do you much good. It's learning to listen to the countless numbers of conceptual stories, viewpoints, opinions in your head, and learning to unpack and unravel and discuss them and argue with them and lessen the neurotic ones and grow the good ones. I swear that is the job of being a Buddhist. But who would have thought it was that? We don't think it's that. We think, the ideas we have about meditation, for example, are like ridiculous, with respect. One, we really believe it's a relaxation technique. Complete misconception. Relaxation, yoga's got brilliant relaxation techniques. We need relaxation badly. But single-pointed concentration is the opposite of relaxing. If you think that you never knew how to drive and your main job is just to hop behind the wheel and then learn to relax, you'll be dead in a minute. Eventually, when you know how to drive, then you can afford to relax. But until then, honey, you've got to be alert. You've got to watch your mind like a hawk every second, be adjusting and fixing it so you can learn to know how to change your thoughts. This is a huge job. So to think it's a relaxation technique is demented. Nothing wrong with them. There are wonderful ones, but this is not it. Single point of concentration is not a relaxation technique. Second, we actually think the function of meditation is to make all the thoughts go away. That implies, isn't it, that you can't stand, you're going crazy, your anxiety is overwhelming, your depression is overwhelming, your anger is overwhelming, and you finally notice it because you've never been to the mechanic before, you didn't know there's such a thing, and there you are 45 and 50, letting your mind run rampant for 45 or 50 years because you didn't know there were such techniques. Mummy didn't tell us, with respect. Now you can't handle, we don't know what to do, we're despairing, so we go to a therapist. That's when we go. And so we think the job of meditation is like a cheap way, it's a cheap therapy. You don't have to pay. So it'll make the thoughts go away. So of course we want the thoughts to go away. When you're having this overwhelming anxiety, overwhelming depression, overwhelming jealousy, we would do anything on the planet to make the feelings go away because they are unbearable. Yes. But that is not the purpose of meditation. It's naive to think that. It's bizarre. These are ancient habits. The other thing we think is meditation is to feel, it's a relaxation technique. It's to make all the thoughts go away, or it's just to feel good, you know? You've got to feel good. It's also utter nonsense. This is naive, and it implies such a simplistic understanding of the mind, you know? So what is meditation then? Well, there are two modes of meditation in Buddhism. We won't discuss that. We'll sort of discuss because we do it you don't have to sit on your bottom to do it. The first one is this brilliant one that the Indians invented called single point of concentration. Brilliant one, this brilliant technique. And of course, it will take you several years to accomplish it full time. I mean, I interviewed 25 years ago one of our monks who's a serious meditator in this type of meditation and others as well. He's been a serious full-time professional meditator. And I interviewed him in 1995 in our magazine, the Mandala magazine, the magazine of our big organization, the worldwide organization that, as you know, Langri is part of, that I'm part of. So I interviewed him back then about this 2.5-year retreat he did, which is pretty intensive. 2.5 years in a little old rocky house in the Sierra Nevada in Spain at our retreat center there called Urseling. It's Dalai Lama was there in 82 and he blessed the place and he said it reminded him of Tibet. It was so beautiful, so special for meditation because you need very conducive conditions to really be best for doing serious meditation. So he did 2.5 years and and one of the things he said was the point I was going to tell you, there's a particular point here. He was trying to get single point of concentration. So it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation in all the texts, the ancient texts and even current, whatever. There's 9 stages of development of this ability to keep the mind focused, but at a subtle level. And he said, 2.5 years, he knew he wouldn't get past the 5th of the 9. So we're talking serious work here. And he also even said that there's no way he could have been prepared to go off to that mountain, literally, and sit there for 2.5 years, 8, 10, 12 hours a day doing this technique, getting better and better and better and better at it, unless he'd become a monk, unless he's done lots of purification practice, lots of other practice, learning a lot of the Buddhist teachings and philosophy, understanding very deeply what the mind is, and then not only that, but even teaching it. That was his preparation. We wouldn't, to even think if you sit down for 5 minutes and try and watch your mind, we get scattered. Within 3 minutes, we have to do the dishes and take care of the dog and the babies and the grandchildren, the husband. It's ridiculous. Imagine sitting there all day, every day for 2.5 years. Forget it. Sounds like a weird person. Sounds like a mentally ill person in our culture. But to really get this technique, it's possible. And people often go and do 2-year retreats, 3-year retreats, and it's not just sitting there watching their navel. They're training their minds. They're doing incredible work on their minds, on their cognitive process. So what is this work? Well, the Buddhist view of the mind, the mental consciousness, is almost deceptively simple. It just sounds weird to us. It's not, our views of psychology and psychiatry, there are volumes of psychiatric, illnesses, and every day we're discovering 42 new ones. Well, Buddha hasn't changed his tune in 2,500 years about the neurotic states of mind. He's got his view down. You don't have to believe it, but that's what we're discussing here. So, the mental consciousness, we can divide into 3 categories. This sounds hilarious. There's only 3 categories of thoughts and therefore feelings and emotions. Those that are negative, neurotic, disturbing, and Lama Yeshe uses about 21 different synonyms for this in his effort to convey to us the character of these states of mind. And we know them. We know, as soon as you say the word anger, oh, I get that. Anxiety, yep, know that one. Worry, jealousy, we know them. They're so simple. But this is also what makes us kind of worried because they sound almost too simplistic. You don't go to your therapist, oh, I got angry today. We call it ADID or OHD or CDDD or whatever we might, or bipolar or schizophrenic, or all Greek words. As soon as there's a serious thing in the West, we give it a Greek word. It's hilarious, I'm not being sarcastic. If you've been labelled bipolar or schizophrenic or OCD or the rest, I'm going to give you the Buddhist label for them, okay? So, Buddha calls them anger, attachment, jealousy, whatever you like. And we know all these, and he lists many of them. And they've got a very specific character. These are the disturbing states of mind. With this we get, check the last time you're anxious. You don't say, oh wow, I was anxious today and I felt so good. No, we know it's horrible. That is clear. That's a key characteristic. But the other characteristic, which we're going to get into, is that and this is get us to try and see how, we're going over the 3 days, we're going to try and look into this because it's not evident to us, that these unhappy emotions, these feelings that grip us and grip our body, that they're rooted in being very elaborate conceptual stories. And that's the level we have to start to unpack and unravel. This takes us time, but we're so addicted to the physical component, to the grossest level, and we call it a feeling. But we have to go beyond, and that's why we have to have some concentration, to dig deeper down in. Not into the past, which is what we do, and this is a radical difference, I'm going to go into this, but down into the thought process itself. This is quite fascinating. And we're going to discover that they're distorted, exaggerating. All these disturbing emotions make mountains out of molehills. Now that sounds a bit unfair initially, but you'll get my point. Now the second lot, what's the second lot? Well, they're the nice ones. They're called the virtuous ones, the positive ones, the upbeat ones, the productive ones, the useful ones. They're called love, compassion, intelligence, kindness, generosity, forgiveness. We know those. And when you have those, you feel great. This is almost so evident, it's kind of shocking that we don't join the dots and see this, Now the third lot, they call them neutral, negative, positive and neutral, but that misleads us. So I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. We all have concentration. We all need concentration, good memory. They call that, the word mindfulness, actually in Buddhist psychology, we give it all these extra meanings with bells and whistles on it. It's literally the word that refers to this mental state that everybody needs, whether you're a murderer or a meditator. You need to have the ability to not forget what you're doing moment by moment. That's the actual meaning of the word mindfulness. We give it lots of meanings in the West, and we're allowed to. Buddha doesn't own copyright on this stuff, but you better be clear what you're talking about. Using Buddha's analysis or somebody else's, So there's all these that I like to call them the mechanics of the mind. They're the parts of your mind that make you able to do anything, whether you're a murderer or a meditator. As Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. They need the ability to not forget what they're doing moment by moment. But we make it sound holy. It's not in its nature. So the negative, neurotic, ridiculous, fear-based, unhappy ones, the positive, virtuous, appropriate, useful, beneficial ones, and then the mechanics. Put it like that. There's no fourth category. Now, Buddha's technique is, the Buddha says we have the ability to unpack and unravel this seeming chaos in here, and I begin to identify all these different parts of our mind. And we're not talking the brain, we're talking the actual subjective cognitive process itself. And of course, this is hugely sophisticated to get to that level, but that's what we're aiming to do. And the point about it is this. The negative, unhappy, deluded ones are the cause of our pain, as we've said, and the positive, useful ones are the cause of our happiness. But this is not the analysis we use, is it? And this is where the Buddha's view is radically different. We know we're angry, very clear. Why are you angry, Robina? Because Fred did this, Mummy did that, the Catholic nuns did this, he did that, the politicians did this. Because our analysis, and this is very deep for us and very fixed, our analysis is that we are this innocent victim of these things that go on out there, that they are the main cause, and I'm this recipient of that behavior. That's why I'm angry. Now we know, in other words, we know we're angry, but it's his fault. Now equally, oh, Robina, you look so happy. I'm so happy. Why are you happy, Robina? Because my boyfriend loves me. So it's exactly the same. We blame the outside world. We say the external person, event, thing is the main cause of my happiness and the main cause of my suffering. So this is so evident to us. We do not question this. And this view is reinforced in our scientific view. It's reinforced in our psychological views. It's reinforced in our neuroscientific views. But Buddha adds this extra component. He says, yep, your boyfriend did punch you in the nose. I saw it. But honey, there's more going on than just that. Your mind is yours. Your anger is yours. Your love is yours. Your happiness is yours. Your suffering is yours. The external world plays a major role, but not the main role. That's the simple way to put it. The external world is merely a catalyst for what goes on in your mind. Now, this is pretty shocking. It's kind of quite shocking because the first thing we hear is, you mean, oh, it's my fault then, is it? Well, that's a heavy way to put it. The Buddha's point is, it's a revelation, is that, they have a saying. If you can change something, please change it. But what if you can't? What to do instead? Change your mind. This is the key point of saying what a Buddhist is, a person who can radically change their mind. So that, but if you think an emotion is set in stone, if you think anger is a real concrete part of you that you can identify in your brain and that you have no choice about it, then you are lost. Then to say that you can change your anger is like a joke. If you really believe that we say, I'm allowed to be angry. We say that. And so, in other words, all these ways we talk are just the tip of the iceberg. They're a symptom of this very tightly held views we have deep in our bones about what anger is, why it is, where it comes from, what are the causes, etc., etc. It's quite an elaborate view we have. And we've learned it from, Mummy didn't have to teach us. The Buddha would say many of the views we have about these things, we just came into this life programmed with them, and they're misconceptions. They're misconceptions. So this is not an easy view to take. But the real point of it is, it tells us that thoughts are not set in stone. Emotions even are not set in stone. We can change them. This is the miracle. This is the miracle, That's why I like to always use examples of my friends in prison, especially the serious examples. Like one woman, I always quote this woman. Her name is Sunny. She's out of prison now. She lives in Ireland. She was on death row, accused with her husband back in the 70s. She was this little hippie hitching with her children in Florida, and they got picked up by two blokes, and the two blokes were stopped by the police, and the two blokes killed the police and blamed the hippies. So there she was with her husband on death row. She you can't even you just get blamed for breaking a cup and you didn't break it. Look at the mental breakdown we have, It's like unbearable. We go mad. We can't stand it. But this woman, she wasn't a Buddhist. She was a nice Jewish girl. And she did yoga and things. But she had a kind of mind, I think, that's like some kind of extraordinary emotional intelligence. She, at some point, her husband even got executed in the period that she was in prison. She went to the execution. She was still in prison, and his head exploded into flames. Can you imagine the nightmare? She lost her children. She had to give them to her parents. They died in a car accident, so they were chucked into the system. She lost her children. Her parents died. Husband was executed. You can't even conceive of the nightmare. And it was this immutable experience. She said at some point, she was in a cell on her own for years with a Bible. That's it. So that's the recipe for people to go completely insane. Lose your mind completely. This is not surprising. I remember, this is my point now, I remember reading about a fellow at the same time, and this is not uncommon in the American prison system. It's pretty corrupt, I have to say. They might chuck me out of America if I talk like this. I'm in America. But so intense. The numbers are unbelievable in America, 5% of the world population, but they've got 25% of the prison population. A quarter of all humans on the planet who live in prison live in American prisons. It's so intense, I can't tell you. The sentencing is so severe. The corruption of the way that the political appointees and things is just awful. The number of people, of course, racism is beyond belief. The wrong sentencing. There's so many organisations now trying to prove with DNA and things, people on death row for 25 years, and it's not uncommon. It's so common. So the nightmare of it is like hell on earth. But I remember reading about this one fellow who was also innocent on death row, and then Sunny. And this is my point here. These extreme examples are really good to hear. They were both accused wrongly of murder. He, in his case, rape and murder. She, in her case, killing two policemen. They were both totally, completely innocent. So naturally, he was what we call natural. He lost his mind. As long as he could talk, he would be raging, screaming, as long as he had a voice. I did not rape and kill that woman. He was completely demented. Now, check our own lives, please, before I go further and even talk about Sunny. Look how, this is our point. In life, things go wrong, don't they? We know we can't control every tiny thing in the world. Things go wrong. And our anxiety, our fears, our worries, our depression, our anger, our jealousy is always in relation to things out there. Sometimes we can't work out what it is. But there's always something there that appears to be the problem. And so then we feel anxious about it. We feel worried about it. We get angry about it. We get jealous about it. So the thing did happen. They were on death row. That's fact. And we have a mind. So the sister did do this. Your daughter did do that. The husband did do this. These are facts. So all the Buddha is saying is, and it's not punitive, it's not heavy, it's like a liberation. And in a sense, we know it. This woman suddenly wasn't a Buddhist, but she had this astonishing emotional intelligence that she said at one point, I finally realized, you can imagine the years of nightmare trying to change things, that I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So she said, I decided I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. Now that's dramatic. She was in a cell 23 hours a day for years. It's like in hell on earth, you can't imagine it. But then she talked to me about, she's in Ireland, I help her, one of my Body She to Trust gives us some money every month because she's working with people who come out of prison now. She's amazing. And and there's no residual, this is interesting, there's no residual suffering because she dealt with, and this is my point now, what do we call it in the West? PTSD, is it? Post-traumatic stress, or what do you call it, please? Say the right word.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you. PTSD. That is, you've suppressed, you've been unable to bear and to cope with that trauma. This is so normal. Now, this woman, this is the point now, she didn't suppress. She had the amazing ability to handle what was in front of her and to realize, she said to me, I knew I had a choice, meaning to think differently, to reinterpret this experience. She had a choice to learn not to be angry, not to be enraged, not to despair. This is so profound, all I'm telling you, this is what Buddha's saying. Buddha's not a creator. He doesn't own copyright on this. She happened to have a mind that was capable of seeing this. This is so astonishing. But this other fellow, this is the point now, he was what we call normal. He really, appalling things were happening to him. He was really innocent. He didn't do the things they said, but he went mad. And look at us. We go mad to some degree every day. We either suppress it and then we have all these traumas coming up, or we just live in rage until we want to kill ourselves or the husband or the policeman or whatever. Because we don't realize we have the power to become familiar with our thoughts and feelings and emotions and to reconfigure them. That's all Buddha's saying. And we do it every day to some degree. You have a fight with your sister on the phone and you zip your lip. You don't say anything. You shut up. You just made a decision not to say those words. That's all Buddha's telling us. We have the power. But of course, it's one step at a time. It's not magic overnight. This woman, it didn't happen overnight, but she became like this. It was 17 years of hell, but she learned to work with it. And then but the interesting point is this. She didn't ever give up trying to get her freedom. And she got her freedom eventually. And the irony is that the other fellow, he was so out of his brain with despair and rage that we couldn't do anything else. So in the end, nothing could happen. He had no ability to even think anything other than go mad. So he couldn't deal with his own reality. He couldn't find lawyers and get himself out of prison. So this is so clear to us. We understand these, and it's good to have extreme examples, But it's the hardest job we'll ever do, because deep in our bones, our minds are programmed with this other approach. I don't have a choice. It's not my fault. I didn't ask to get born. It's his fault and their fault and her fault. I'm allowed to be anxious. I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to be depressed. I'm not trying to be cruel here. But as we get to see our minds, we see this is the view we have. So my mother used to say, you're your own worst enemy, Bobsy. This is tough work. This is the hardest work we'll ever do, but it is a miracle when we can. And this has nothing to do with belief. Don't worry about karma and past lives and future lives. Forget all that. This is right here, right now. This woman, she's got a sort of fairly typical New Age view. She doesn't know Buddhist teaching. She doesn't really know about karma. She didn't think about it. She just had this extraordinary ability. And I would suggest the reason is because she didn't have much anger. I'm going to describe this in great detail. She didn't have much anger. So she had this ability to keep her mind sane. It's so amazing. I have such unbelievable admiration for this woman, And the examples, and this is all it's pointing out. All it's pointing to is that each of us do have the ability to some degree, starting somewhere, to know that my thoughts are mine. Yep, outside things happen. No probs. That's not being argued with. But the thoughts, we've got the power. If you'd said to that fellow who was out of his brain with despair and rage and unbelievable suffering that, you know what, you can learn to change your mind, he wouldn't even be able to hear it. And that's how we are, even in our lives. If your husband's brutalized you for 35 years and someone comes along and says you can change your minds about it, you'll just tell them to go effing off, you know. What are you talking about? Because we're so involved in the pain of it, which is very real pain. So this is where you've got to know where you're at. So if a person comes to me for advice and they're overwhelmed by the rage and the hurt, I'm not going to give them a lecture about changing their mind. I'll tell them, you're right, you're absolutely right, your husband's an asshole, kick him out. You've got to know where you're at, how to handle all this stuff, you know. Because if we're overwhelmed by the pain of it, and this is what suffering is, if we're overwhelmed by the pain and the hopelessness, then you can't hear these words, you can change your thoughts. It's quite an advanced concept. God in heaven, it's incredible. But this is what we're discussing here, you know.